I was 24, living in a quiet town in Vermont, thinking I knew exactly what my life looked like. My apartment overlooked Main Street, the same narrow road I'd walked along every day since high school, with the same corner cafe, the same familiar faces, and the same sense of routine that made life feel safe. My girlfriend, Lauren, had been with me for almost 2 years. I trusted her. I loved her. Or at least, I thought I did. It started with something small, almost unnoticeable. A notification that lit up on her phone while she was asleep beside me. I wasn't snooping. I never had been. But my eye caught a phrase, just a few words, and something inside me shifted. Can't wait to see you again. No name, no emojis, just that. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a work message, a joke from a friend, a mistake in the wrong chat. But the doubt had already started. And once it takes root, it doesn't let go quietly. I tried to sleep, but the words kept running in my head. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that maybe I was imagining something that wasn't there. But by the next morning, my chest felt tight, and I couldn't ignore it. When Lauren woke up, she kissed me like every morning. Coffee, she asked. Her tone didn't change. Her eyes didn't flicker. Nothing in her demeanor hinted at what might be hidden in her life, or in her phone. That day, I found myself at work barely able to focus. Every minute stretched long and heavy. I avoided looking at her text messages on purpose, telling myself I didn't need confirmation. But the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't leave. That night, curiosity, combined with an aching need to know the truth, finally won. I unlocked her phone. What I found wasn't graphic, but it was enough. Casual conversations with a man named Alex, plans to meet at cafes and walks in the park, laughing emojis, subtle references to memories I wasn't part of. She had created a separate life, hidden in plain sight. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I just sat there, staring at the screen, letting the cold reality settle in. Lauren eventually went to bed, leaving me alone with a hollow feeling that I couldn't shake. By sunrise, I knew nothing could ever be the same. The trust was gone. The world I thought I knew had cracked. I didn't know it then, but this moment, this silent, painful discovery, was the beginning of something entirely new. Something that would challenge everything I believed about love, trust, and what it means to truly move forward. The days after I found the messages felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life on autopilot. I didn't confront Lauren right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed time to understand what I was feeling. Anger was there, sure, but it was mixed with disbelief and a quiet sadness that settled deep in my chest. Lauren acted exactly the same. She texted me during the day, asked what I wanted for dinner, complained about work. Watching her move so comfortably through our shared routine made everything worse. It felt like I was the only one living in reality while she stayed inside a version of the world where nothing was wrong. Every night, I replayed the conversations I'd seen on her phone. I noticed patterns I hadn't paid attention to before. Late meetings, sudden errands, weekends when she needed space. All the signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. A few days later, I ran into Ben, an old friend, at a small hardware store near the edge of town. We talked for a bit, nothing serious. As we were about to part ways, he hesitated. Hey man, he said carefully, I don't want to cause trouble, but I saw Lauren last week. She wasn't alone. My heart sank, even though I already knew. He told me he'd seen her at a cafe just outside town, sitting across from a guy he didn't recognize. Close enough that there was no mistaking the nature of it. He apologized, like it was his fault for telling me. I thanked him and left without saying much else. That night, I finally confronted her. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told her I knew. For a moment, she looked relieved, like the secret had been weighing on her more than the betrayal itself. She admitted to seeing Alex for several months. Said she'd been confused. Said she didn't know how to end things. I asked her why she hadn't just been honest. She didn't have an answer. We sat there in silence, the kind that feels heavy and final. By the end of the night, she packed a bag and said she'd stay with a friend. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no promises to fix things. Just a quiet understanding that something important had ended. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt empty in a way I'd never experienced before. Not just physically empty, but emotionally hollow. In a small town like ours, separation doesn't stay private for long. People notice when routines change. When one half of a couple suddenly disappears. I could already feel the questions forming, even if no one had asked them yet. I didn't know what came next. All I knew was that pretending everything was fine had become impossible. And now, for the first time, I was alone with the truth. The silence after Lauren left wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, invasive, and relentless. Every room felt louder without her presence. Her mug still sat in the sink. A sweater hung over the back of the chair like it was waiting for her to come back. I considered packing her things, but something about that felt too final, like closing a door I wasn't ready to shut yet. Work became my refuge, not because it helped me heal, but because it distracted me. Long hours, repetitive tasks, anything to keep my mind from circling back to the same thoughts. At night, though, there was no escape. Just me, the quiet, and the echo of what I'd lost. That's when I started going to the local bookstore. It was a small place tucked between a bakery and a florist, the kind of shop that smelled like old paper and coffee. I'd go there in the evenings, pretending I needed a book, when really I just needed somewhere to sit that wasn't my apartment. That's where I met Claire. She was behind the counter the first night I came in, flipping through a paperback with a pair of reading glasses resting low on her nose. She looked up and smiled, not the polite customer service smile, but something warmer, more genuine. "Looking for anything specific?" she asked. I shook my head. "Just browsing." She nodded, like she understood more than I'd said. Over the next week, I found myself returning to the bookstore almost every night. Sometimes I bought a book. Sometimes I didn't. Claire and I started talking in small pieces, about authors, about living in a small town, about how quiet Vermont could feel in the winter. I learned she was 34, divorced, lived alone. She spoke calmly, deliberately, like someone who had already been through storms and come out steadier on the other side. There was no flirting at first, just conversation, comfortable, unforced. One night, as we talked near closing time, she asked, "Rough week?" I hesitated, then nodded. She didn't push for details, just said, "Those tend to find us when we least expect them." That was it. No advice, no sympathy, just acknowledgement. And somehow that was enough. I realized later that what drew me to Claire wasn't attraction, at least not at first. It was the way she listened, the way she didn't rush to fill silence, the way she seemed grounded in herself. For the first time since Lauren left, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. I didn't know then that Claire would become more than a quiet presence in a bookstore. I only knew that when I left that night, the silence didn't feel quite as heavy. And that was new. I told myself Claire was just a distraction, a neutral place to land while my life reorganized itself. I wasn't looking for anything, especially not another relationship. The wound from Lauren was still too fresh, too raw. And yet, I kept going back to the bookstore. Not because I needed books, because I needed the quiet. Claire and I started talking more. Not about anything heavy at first, just fragments of our lives. She told me about moving to Vermont after her divorce, about how the town felt both comforting and isolating at the same time. I told her about growing up here, about how strange it felt to stay while everyone else seemed to leave. One evening, after the shop closed, she asked if I wanted to walk with her to the nearby coffee place that stayed open late. I hesitated for half a second, then agreed. We walked side by side in silence at first. It wasn't awkward. It felt intentional, like neither of us was in a rush to fill the space. When we sat down with our drinks, the conversation drifted naturally. She didn't ask about Lauren directly. She asked about me, what I liked doing when I wasn't working, what kind of life I thought I wanted. Questions that felt simple on the surface but caught me off guard. I realized I hadn't asked myself any of them in a long time. At one point, she said, "You seem like someone who gives a lot without checking if it's being returned." I laughed quietly. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled. "Only to people who've done the same." That stayed with me. Over the next couple of weeks, our meetings became more regular. Coffee after closing, walks through town, long conversations that didn't feel like dates, but also didn't feel like nothing. There was a pull there, subtle, restrained, mutual. Claire never crossed a line. Neither did I, and that made it more intense. I noticed the contrast between her and Lauren without trying to. Claire didn't seek validation. She didn't perform. She didn't need attention to feel secure. She was steady, self-contained, and comfortable with who she was. That calm was contagious. Meanwhile, Lauren's name started resurfacing around town. Someone mentioned seeing her with Alex again. Someone else asked how I was holding up. I kept my answers vague. I wasn't interested in controlling the narrative. I was too focused on rebuilding myself quietly. One night, as Claire and I sat on a bench near the river, she said something that surprised me. "Whatever you're healing from," she said gently, "you're doing it the right way." Slowly. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and realized this wasn't just comfort. This was connection. Not rushed. Not desperate. Not built on distraction. Something I hadn't been looking for, but something that felt real. And that realization scared me almost as much as it grounded me. In a small town, nothing stays invisible for long. At first, Claire and I blended into the background. Two people having coffee, walking through familiar streets, existing quietly. But eventually, people began to notice patterns. And patterns invite speculation. I caught it in the way conversations paused when we entered a room together. In the subtle curiosity of people who pretended not to stare. No one asked directly, but I could feel the shift. The town was connecting dots. Lauren's name started floating back into conversations. Not aggressively, just enough to remind me she hadn't disappeared from the story entirely. "She didn't think you'd move on so fast," someone mentioned casually, like they were commenting on the weather. I didn't correct them. I hadn't moved on fast. I had moved on carefully. Claire noticed the change before I acknowledged it. One evening, as we walked back from the bookstore, she asked, "Has she tried contacting you?" I shook my head. "Not yet." Claire nodded slowly. "She will." I asked her how she was so sure. "Because people don't like losing control of a narrative," she said. "Especially when they think they still own part of it." A few days later, it happened. I ran into Lauren at the farmer's market on Saturday morning. It was crowded enough that avoiding her would have been obvious. She looked surprised when she saw me, then guarded. Her eyes flicked briefly to Claire standing beside me. We exchanged polite hellos. Nothing more. But as we walked away, I felt it. Her attention lingering. Confusion, maybe even disbelief. Later that night, Claire and I went to a quiet bar just outside town. Dim lights. Soft music. The kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. Lauren walked in about 20 minutes later. This time, there was no mistaking the tension. She sat across the room with a friend, laughing too loudly, checking her phone again and again. Claire leaned toward me. "Do you want to go?" she asked softly. I looked around. At the room. At Lauren. Then at Claire. "No," I said. "I'm fine." We stayed. We talked. We ordered another drink. We didn't look in Lauren's direction again. That night, something shifted inside me. Seeing her didn't hurt. It didn't anger me. It clarified things. The emotional distance I'd been building quietly was finally complete. On the drive home, Claire was quiet. "Thank you for asking earlier," I said. She smiled slightly. "I wasn't asking because of her," she said. "I was asking because of you." That difference mattered. By the next morning, I knew the town had noticed. Not because of gossip, but because I hadn't reacted. And in a place where reactions are everything, calm speaks louder than any explanation ever could. After that night at the bar, I stopped thinking in terms of closure and started thinking in terms of distance. Emotional distance. Mental distance. The kind that doesn't come from avoidance, but from acceptance. I didn't talk about Lauren. Not to friends. Not to coworkers. Not to Claire. I let people fill in the gaps themselves. And they did. In small towns, perception shifts slowly, then all at once. People started noticing contradictions in Lauren's story. Different versions told to different people. Casual comments that didn't line up. No one confronted her directly, but the change in energy was obvious. Claire never pointed it out. She didn't need to. One afternoon, Ben mentioned that Lauren had tried to explain things to him. He said it felt rehearsed, like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. I just nodded. What struck me wasn't satisfaction. It was detachment. Lauren's influence in social circles began to fade. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations grew shorter. Not out of cruelty, but discomfort. People sensed something was off and adjusted accordingly. Meanwhile, Claire and I grew closer. Not dramatically, not quickly. Our connection deepened through shared routines. Morning coffee. Evenings at the bookstore. Walks through town where we talked about life, mistakes, and the quiet lessons you only learn after things fall apart. She told me about her marriage once. Briefly. Without bitterness. Just facts. I told her more about Lauren. Not the betrayal, but what I had ignored. The red flags. The moments I'd rationalized. "You didn't fail," Claire said. "You learned." That reframing changed everything. A week later, I ran into Lauren again at a convenience store. She looked tired, less composed. She tried to make small talk, but it fell flat. I was polite, neutral, unaffected. As I walked away, I realized something important. I wasn't part of her story anymore. The consequences unfolding around her weren't mine to manage. I hadn't orchestrated them. I hadn't influenced them. I had simply stepped out of the way. That night, Claire and I sat on her porch, the air cool and still. She handed me a cup of tea and said quietly, "You're lighter lately." I smiled. I feel lighter. And for the first time, I understood that real power doesn't come from control or retaliation. It comes from letting go and watching life do the rest. By late autumn, the shift was undeniable. The town hadn't taken sides loudly, but it had chosen a direction quietly. People didn't ask me questions anymore. They didn't offer sympathy or advice. Instead, they treated me like someone who had already moved on, which, in a way, I had. Lauren, on the other hand, seemed stuck in place. I noticed it in small ways. She lingered longer in conversations, trying to hold people's attention. She laughed a bit too hard. She shared stories that felt slightly exaggerated, like she was trying to reassert a version of herself that no longer landed the same way. Claire noticed it too. "She's chasing relevance," she said one evening as we watched people walk past the bookstore window. "That happens when control starts slipping." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. One night, Lauren finally reached out to me. A simple message. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just a question. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Old me would have answered immediately. Wanted clarity. Wanted validation. Wanted some kind of emotional resolution. But that version of me felt distant now, like someone I used to know. I didn't reply. The next day, word traveled fast. Lauren had been asking about me. About Claire. About whether we were serious. People told me without being prompted, like they were reporting weather updates. Claire asked me directly, "Does this bother you?" I thought about it. Honestly, no, I said. It just confirms what I already knew. That she hadn't lost me because of a mistake. She'd lost me because she couldn't accept losing control. A few days later, I saw Lauren at a small gathering hosted by a mutual acquaintance. Claire was with me. Lauren arrived late, scanned the room, and her eyes landed on us. The moment stretched longer than it should have. She walked over. "I didn't know you two were together," she said, forcing a smile. Claire met her gaze calmly. "We are." No tension, no attitude, just truth. Lauren nodded, said something about needing a drink, and walked away. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. That night, as Claire and I drove home, she reached for my hand. "You handled that well," she said. "I didn't do anything," I replied. She smiled. "Exactly. That's when it clicked. Revenge doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like growth, like becoming someone who no longer reacts to the same triggers." Lauren hadn't lost her footing because of me. She'd lost it because the version of herself she relied on no longer worked. And I was no longer part of the equation. For the first time, I wasn't watching her story unfold. I was fully inside my own. By the time winter settled in, the town felt different. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because something subtle had changed beneath the surface. The tension that once followed Lauren everywhere had thinned out, replaced by a quiet distance people didn't bother to explain. I noticed it most in how rarely her name came up anymore. When it did, it was brief, neutral, almost detached. That's how I knew it was over. Not the relationship, but the story itself. Small towns thrive on drama, but only when it's fed. Without reactions, without resistance, even the most persistent narratives fade. Claire and I didn't discuss Lauren. We didn't need to. Our days had filled up with routines that felt real and grounding. Mornings with coffee at her kitchen table. Evenings closing the bookstore together, stacking chairs, turning off lights. Weekends spent walking trails just outside town, talking about anything except the past. One night, as snow started falling softly outside, Claire asked me something unexpected. "Do you ever miss who you were before all of this?" I thought about it carefully. "No," I said. "I miss who I thought I was, but not who I actually was." She nodded, like that made perfect sense. I realized then how much I'd changed. I was calmer, more observant, less reactive. The betrayal had stripped away assumptions I didn't even know I carried. And in their place was something steadier, self-respect. Lauren reached out one last time. Not directly to me, but through a mutual friend, asking how I was doing. I heard about it days later. The question felt hollow, like an echo of something that used to matter. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Out of closure. Claire noticed the weight lift from me before I fully acknowledged it myself. "You're not carrying it anymore," she said one evening as we sat on the couch, the only light coming from a lamp in the corner. "Carrying what?" I asked. "The need to be understood by someone who chose not to understand you," she said. That hit harder than I expected. Outside, the town moved on. New rumors replaced old ones. New relationships became topics of conversation. Lauren blended into the background, not ostracized, not punished, just no longer central. And I was okay with that. For the first time, I felt like my life wasn't a reaction to something that happened to me. It was something I was actively living, choosing. The shift wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was permanent. And that made all the difference. I used to think that healing came with a sense of triumph. That one day I'd wake up feeling victorious, like I'd somehow won. But healing didn't arrive that way. It came quietly, almost unnoticed, slipping into my life between ordinary moments. I started realizing what I'd gained not in grand revelations, but in small details. I slept through the night again. I stopped checking my phone obsessively. I laughed without feeling guilty about it. Claire and I grew closer in a way that didn't feel rushed or forced. There was no urgency, no sense that either of us was trying to fill a void. We talked openly about expectations, boundaries, and what we wanted from the future. It was the kind of honesty I didn't even realize I'd been missing before. One evening, while cooking dinner together, Claire said something that stuck with me. "Betrayal doesn't just break trust with someone else," she said. "It breaks trust with yourself. Rebuilding that is the hardest part." She was right. For a long time, I'd questioned my judgment, wondered how I hadn't seen the signs, wondered if I was naive. But slowly, that self-doubt faded. I wasn't weak. I wasn't blind. I had simply trusted someone who didn't deserve it. Lauren's name came up less and less. When it didn't carry weight anymore. I felt no urge to defend myself or explain the past. It had become just that, the past. One afternoon, I ran into Lauren unexpectedly. She looked fine, normal, maybe even happy. And for the first time, that didn't bother me. I didn't feel jealousy. I didn't feel resentment. I felt nothing. That's when I knew I was free. Claire noticed my expression as we walked away. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Better than okay." That night, sitting on the porch, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the anger, the slow unraveling, the quiet rebuilding. What I gained wasn't revenge. It wasn't validation. It wasn't seeing someone else lose. It was clarity. I learned who I was when things fell apart. I learned how to sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it. I learned that moving on doesn't require closure from the person who hurt you. It requires closure within yourself. Most importantly, I learned that love doesn't have to be chaotic to be intense. It can be calm, steady, grounded. Claire didn't save me. She didn't need to. She walked beside me while I saved myself. And that made all the difference. I used to believe that life followed a script, that if you did the right things, stayed loyal, and played by the rules, everything would fall into place the way it was supposed to. Betrayal shattered that belief. But what came after rebuilt something better in its place. By the time spring returned to our town, I felt like a different person, not hardened, not bitter, just clearer. The kind of clarity that only comes after you've had to sit with loss and learn how to let it go. Claire and I didn't make dramatic declarations about the future. We didn't need to. Our relationship was built on presence, not promises. We showed up for each other consistently, without pressure or expectation. It felt adult, honest, safe. I thought about Lauren less and less, until one day I realized I hadn't thought about her at all. Not out of effort, but because she no longer had a place in my emotional world. She was a chapter I'd finished reading. The town moved on completely. New couples became the focus. New rumors took shape. Life continued the way it always does, forward. Sometimes, I catch myself smiling at how everything turned out. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I gained by losing it. I gained self-respect. I gained patience. I gained the ability to recognize healthy love when it appeared. If betrayal hadn't happened, I might have stayed in a relationship that slowly drained me. I might have ignored my own needs in the name of comfort. Instead, I was forced to confront reality and choose myself. One evening, sitting with Claire on her porch as the sun dipped below the trees, I realized something simple and profound. The best revenge isn't living better to prove a point. It's living better because you finally know how. I didn't plan this life. I didn't expect it, but it's mine. And for the first time, that feels like enough.